Right, here we are moving along on our crazy plan to generate $10,000 a month in passive income as a retired guy. And again, if you've watched my other videos, I told you I'm planning on trying to get to that point within 6 months. And ultimately, I want to get to the point where I'm spending no more than 10 hours a week to do the work to generate that revenue. So let's jump right in. I'm going to explain stream number 2 this time around. Okay, so for stream number 2, this concept of setting up a storefront and populating it with stuff that's printed on demand is not brand new. It's been around for a while. A lot of people have made a lot of money doing it. However, if you're like me, you probably had no familiarity with it at all because you've not been looking at ways to do this kind of stuff. So the purpose of this video is to really break this down and explain how it works and explain how difficult or not difficult it is to do, and run through a couple of the basic costs associated with this thing. And then I'll do a couple of other videos to actually get into the real meat of doing the setup and building out some products and getting them ready to sell. But for right now, let's talk about the concept. So let's talk about how this works. If you're like me and you really haven't had any exposure to this whole world of having a shop and printing things on demand and so forth, well, let's just run through it real quick and I'll give you kind of the overview from 10,000 feet here. So Etsy is a website that was created initially for people that were maybe making, let's say, handmade jewelry. And they knew how to make jewelry, didn't know how to sell it. So Etsy was created to fill that need of giving people a way to showcase their items and sell them to a much larger audience than them I have access to by going to a swap meet in their local town or whatever. And so Etsy started out as this mechanism of connecting individual sellers with individual buyers. Over time, the companies that did printing and embroidering and such came up with a way to be able to profitably print, let's say, one item at a time. And so they created a business model where they let you create an account with them, create some designed items that you design, and then link those items up to your Etsy storefront, and that becomes your inventory. So let's say that I'm printing decorative mugs, okay? And I've got this great picture of a kingfisher bird that I took and I want to put that on a mug. So I would set up an account with the print on demand company. I would put my picture in there. I would lay it out how it's supposed to look on the mug and then store that image as an item that's ready to be sold. And then I link that up to my shop in Etsy. Now you come along as the buyer, let's say, and you really think that's a great picture and you want that on your mug, so you order one of those mugs. Now, at that point in time, that's really the first time that thing actually gets produced, and only one of them gets produced to fill your order. So Etsy takes the order, collects the money from the buyer, electronically transmits all the information over to the print-on-demand company that you've hooked up with. They then, and only then, print that mug. They ship it out and send it off to your buyer. So that's conceptually how it works, okay? So now we know roughly how this works, okay? I will make another video that'll go into a lot more detail about setting all this up. But for now, we're talking high-level concepts. So, how difficult is this to do? Well, this is a little bit more complex than setting up our YouTube channel, which we're using as stream number 1 of our income streams. For YouTube, remember I mentioned you could hold your phone up and talk to the thing, and that's all you needed. For this, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. You are going to have to set up a shop on Etsy, and there are a few little costs associated with setting that up. Then you're going to have to choose one or more of these print-on-demand companies and set up an account with that company. you're also going to go through a little process of linking those two things together so that the orders can be transmitted back and forth and so forth, and the items can be pulled from the print-on-demand company over to show up in your store. So it's a little more complex to set up, and probably, if we're going to be honest, there's going to be a fair amount more time on the setup side to get this thing rolling, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Setting up the store is a one-time thing. So we're just going to build that out. We've got a few elements we've got to put in there. We've got to define the store and set up our shipping policy and our return policy and a few things like that. Nothing overly difficult, but we do have to set that up and get it working. There will be a financial chunk of it where we have to prove or set up the way we're going to pay the vendors and where the money's going to go when Etsy collects it from the buyer. And then the real work is going to start by when we go over to our print-on-demand company, because this is the point where we have to put on our artistic hat a little bit and create the things that we want to put in our store. Now, I will say that as you're choosing your print-on-demand company, I'm probably not going to give you a real definite opinion on which one you should use. In fact, I don't even think it's necessary to only pick one. You could be working with 2 or 3 of them and pulling a different product from each one, depending on your needs. But Printify seems to have an enormous selection of stuff that you can print. Phone cases and pillows and water bottles and coffee cups and t-shirts and hats and all kinds of apparel and whatnot. But, however, Printify doesn't do their own printing. They kind of, in essence, subcontract that out to print shops all over the place. So I have heard people say that from time to time, depending on the kind of thing that you're printing, there may be a chance that your end product isn't consistent in how it looks, depending on where it got printed from. So there's probably maybe a little less quality control on the back end getting your item built. Printful, in the United States anyway, prints their own stuff out of their own shop. So if you are just doing t-shirts and hats, that may be the site that you wind up going to first. Gelato, on the other hand, seems to be a little bit more kind of geared towards wall art and home goods and things like that. And so that might be, if that's more your niche, then that might be the direction you wind up going. But all 3 of them have designer tools in their site where you can select the item that you're going to print on. Let's keep with that coffee mug thing. So you pick the kind of mug you want, and there's a bunch of different variations. But let's say we're picking our basic 11-ounce white mug. So they'll all let you select that mug, and then they drop a design tool up in front of you, and they say, okay, upload your picture here and place it on the mug. Or they've got graphic icons if you are coming up with your own little saying, like, don't talk to me until I've drinking half this cup of coffee. You can put that text and some graphics on, build it out yourself from their little tools. And then you lay it out on the mug, and basically you've designed the product. Then you fill out the description of the product, and then you set your price for the product. So you do all that on the design tool side, or on the print-on-demand side in their design tool. And then you link that to your store on Etsy. And there, again, that part's pretty straightforward. Once you've linked your 2 sites together, then you just push a button, and let's say you're using Printify. They send the item over to Etsy and say, okay, this is what it's going to look like, and this is what the description is, and here's how much the person wants to charge for it. So you don't actually have to be an artist to get this done. Even if you decide that you want to do something that's a topical topic, you can take inspiration from other people's designs and make your own version of that and put it on something. So let's say you don't have a clue what you want to come up with, but you've found this neat saying about people who love books. You could make your own version of that thing about people who love books, put that on your coffee cups, and sell your product in your own way without coming up with something fresh and new. Also, this lends itself very well to using your own photography, though, especially the gelato thing. And again, being retired, a lot of people I know kind of once they get retired, their photography game gets kind of stepped up because they have more time to go work on it and travel around and so forth. And so I've seen people who are being very successful putting their own photography items or their own photography pictures on items. So lots of different ways you can put the two things together, but it's a little bit more complicated, like I said, than creating a YouTube video and pushing it up there. This setup is. Going forward, the mechanism essentially kind of runs itself once you get it set up, but the setup process is going to take some work. Once it's all set up, you don't have to do anything if you set everything up right to make this happen. The buyer clicks buy, Etsy sends the order to the printer, they print it, they ship it, the payment happens, you get paid, and you don't have to do anything. You will have to do the customer service portion of things. There's a mechanism through Etsy where the customer can ask you a question, or they have a problem, they got their cup and it was broken. You might have to process that with the vendor and say, hey, here's a damaged good, we need to replace it or whatever. So there's some of that will take place. Nothing's ever a free ride in life, but the big work on this will be that initial setup. Now, let's talk briefly about how much this costs, because there are some startup costs associated with this. Etsy itself has a setup fee. I believe it's $29.99 a one-time fee to set up your shop on their site. And then they have a listing fee for everything that every time you list an item, you pay a little fee to put that item on their website, which makes sense. You know, they've got to get paid to have the back-end structure in place. The printer has a cost for whatever item that you are going to print on. Now that's fixed per item. So the coffee cup is going to cost you $5, let's say. I'm making that number up, but let's say it's $5 for the coffee cup. It's only ever going to cost you $5. And then it's going to cost you a shipping charge, and any other charges that are associated with that will all be explained to you as you're setting up your pricing, so you can combine all those costs together, figure out what your total out the door cost is, and then you're going to mark that up by whatever amount you want to mark it up by, so that you're making a profit after all your costs are taken out of this. Now that is no different than what someone does when they set up a hardware store and they want to sell decorative doorknobs in their hardware store. They set up the store, they have the empty shelf there, they order the doorknobs from their hardware supplier, but the difference is if they want to have 10 doorknobs in stock, they have to buy and pay for those 10 doorknobs and put them on their shelf. If they picked badly and those doorknobs don't sell, they're out that money and they have that inventory sitting there forever and it doesn't go anywhere. The difference is with this print on demand is your shelf is virtual, your product is virtual, and you don't have any standing inventory at all to deal with. It's only created as it's needed. So those costs are controllable. Again, the one-time fee is insignificant for the setup. And then the other costs you're just going to factor into the costs of your item. I also believe that when you start to set this up, especially as you start to establish these relationships with these print-on-demand suppliers, most all of them have a mechanism when you create something. Let's say we got our picture all laid out on our coffee cup. They have a mechanism in there where you, as that printing partner, can order a sample product of that. Now, you have to pay for that, but it's basically the cost of the thing, and they'll print it and ship it to you. Now, most people will, if you're in that spot where you're trying to figure out which one of these companies to work with and everything else is equal, then I would suggest what you do is set up an account with all three of them, or whatever ones you're considering, and create the same item in each portal and order your own sample of each item from each vendor. That's going to give you a way to identify who processed the thing the quickest, how the shipping went, how the communication went, because they're going to communicate with you electronically just like you're the customer, and what it looked like when you took it out of the box. Were the colors right? Was it, well done? Are you willing to put your reputation on this item as you sell it to people? So you will want to purchase samples of this stuff, at least until your comfort level gets higher with the vendor you're working with. And you may find that you want to order one of kind of most L that you're doing out there, and you don't have to do it all at once, but you might find that you get in the habit of, let's say you're selling wall art of your photographs. You might find that some of them don't translate all that well to being printed on glass or being printed on canvas or whatever. So you might have to order a few samples of stuff to figure out what you like and what you don't like, or what works and what doesn't work. So expect to have a little bit of kind of sunk costs in the business that are burned up buying samples. I think it's just something that you've got to do, because this is your shop. You're the one who's got to have the reputation with the buyers. And what you're hoping is that they'll like your stuff and they come back to your storefront time and time again because they like your stuff. But what you see on the computer screen when you're building it out isn't always exactly what is going to come out of the box when it gets shipped. So buy the samples. Just do it. So conceptually, there we have it. That's the basis for our stream number 2. I've been setting this up, and I will say that our 10 hours a week thing is not going to fly at this point. The setup work is taking some time to get through there, partly because I'm having to get myself educated as I go, which you're going to have to do as well. But I believe it's much like I mentioned when I talked about making YouTube videos. Over time, I think it will get streamlined. Even as I'm building out new products to put in my store, in my shop, I think I'll get better at it. I'll know what works, what doesn't work. The process will become less time consuming. But for right now, it's taken a bit to get through this. Okay, so this next video right here on the screen, we're going to go actually set up our store and get the Etsy side of this thing built out. And I'll try to walk you through that pretty much step by step.